Three men in fake law enforcement uniforms kicked open my shed door, shouting about compliance violations, while one of them snapped photos of my scoped rifle like it was a crime scene. No warrant, no IDs, just smug grins and power they thought no one would question. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as they threatened arrest and stormed off like wannabe commandos, unaware I had trail cam footage, a decorated sniper's past, and a plan. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when the air thickened with the kind of humidity that made your shirt stick to your spine. Red Mesa in July didn't ask for your comfort. It tested your tolerance. I was already sweating through the back of my faded flannel, crouched by the north wall of my shed with a hammer in one hand and a rusted hinge in the other. I'd built this shed myself a decade ago, back when the town still felt like a place where neighbors waved from porches instead of peeking through blinds. The wood had aged to a brittle gray, but it held, just like I did. Then came the knock, sharp, intentional, not the kind that asks, the kind that announces. I stood slowly, the ache in my knees reminding me I wasn't 30 anymore. The gate creaked as I opened it, and there they were. Three men, clean cut, wearing khaki button-downs with patches stitched tight on their sleeves. HOA logos, not government, not military, but they wanted to look the part. The tall one in the middle stepped forward like he owned the dirt under my boots. Aviators reflected back my own frown as he tapped a cheap clipboard with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "We need to inspect your shed for non-compliant storage," he said, like it was an order and not a request. His voice had that HOA smugness, passive-aggressive and rehearsed, like every word had been workshopped by a committee of Karens with gavel fantasies. I scanned them. No body cams, no credentials, just nylon belts with flashlights and radios. The man on the left adjusted his belt like he was holstering authority he didn't actually possess. The one on the right kept glancing at the backyard, like he already knew what he was looking for. Every part of me said not to let them in. My gut, my spine, the memory of every letter I'd ever received citing me for excessive lawn clover or unauthorized flag display. But after years of living under their thumb, of watching neighbors fold or flee, fatigue won out. The path of least resistance always starts with a shrug and ends with regret. I opened the gate wider. "Make it quick," I said. They didn't nod, didn't thank me. They just moved forward in a triangle formation, boots crunching the gravel like they were marching into enemy territory. But they weren't prepared for whose territory it really was. Not yet. The first one didn't even wait for permission. He brushed past me like I was a welcome mat, boot heel grinding into the dirt as he yanked open the shed's weather-warped door. Hinges squealed in protest, metal against metal. Just another thing I'd meant to fix before summer baked it worse. Inside, the air was thick with cedar, oil, and years of sweat-soaked discipline. It wasn't just a shed. It was mine. The tall one ducked in after him, his head brushing the low beam I'd carved by hand. He didn't care. None of them did. They moved like men with badges, but all they had was arrogance stitched into polyester uniforms. They tore through everything. One grabbed the latch on the gun locker and flung it open before I could finish telling him it was registered. He ran his hand along the row of locked cases, stopping when he saw the matte black Pelican vault with the stencil, "Instructor, Tactical Precision." He opened it like he expected contraband and found competence instead. My M2010 sniper rifle sat there like a coiled warning, bolt locked, chamber empty, barrel polished and tagged per regulation, military grade, civilian legal, and earned through 30 years of service. He didn't even bother to check the documents tucked in the lid sleeve, just snapped a photo with a cracked phone and muttered, "Illegal weapons?" like he was hoping I'd lash out and make his job easy. I didn't flinch. I kept my voice calm, calculated. I'm a certified sniper instructor, SWAT certified, state cleared. You're looking at gear I've used to train law enforcement longer than you've had facial hair. He didn't argue, didn't apologize, just smirked, like he knew the law but didn't care for it. The third one stood by the door, arms crossed, eyes flicking from my face to the rifle, then to the camera now full of out-of-context images. They weren't here to find truth. They were here to create a story. The lead finally stepped out of the shadows, his clipboard still in hand, like he was authoring my guilt in real time. "We'll be reporting this to the board," he said with rehearsed authority. "Expect fines, possibly an arrest. No paperwork, no citation, no chain of custody, just 3 cowards in HOA cosplay manufacturing fear." They walked out with the same smug air they came in with. No words, no eye contact, just the assumption they'd won something. But they didn't take anything from me. They woke something. The envelope was thick and smug. That was the first clue. Official HOA letterhead embossed with fake gravitas, sealed like a court summons, the kind of thing meant to intimidate before you even open it. I tore it with one hand, still holding a wrench in the other, and read the first line aloud in the silence of my workshop. Notice of violation. Immediate penalty assessed. $5,000. It read like a parody of itself. Unpermitted weapon storage. Unauthorized structural alterations. Verbal threat to HOA enforcement personnel. The last one made me laugh out loud. An ugly sound, sharp and bitter. I'd barely spoken during the inspection. But that didn't matter. The truth didn't matter. This wasn't enforcement. It was fabrication. I drove to the HOA office that Friday, half hoping for a civil discussion, but I should have known better. The board held their meetings inside what used to be the community rec hall, now fitted with blinds that stayed drawn and cameras that watched everything except themselves. I wasn't even on the agenda. My name didn't come up. Not once. When I stood in the back of the room and calmly raised my hand, Karen Hastings glanced at me like I'd just tracked mud on her marble floor. She was in her element, seated dead center, flanked by her hand-picked committee of yes-men. Her blazer was powder blue, her expression iron-clad pleasant, and her eyes were hollow as polished stone. "You're not recognized to speak," she said, voice sweet like poisoned syrup. "The matter is closed." Closed. Just like that. My jaw clenched. I didn't yell, didn't argue. I stood there and stared. I wanted her to see my face, memorize it, understand that whatever game she thought she was winning, she hadn't played it with the right opponent. The board continued on, discussing grass-length violations and recycling bin placements, like they weren't issuing life-altering fines on fabricated charges. A neighbor, Tom Jensen, looked at me and then quickly looked away. Cowardice, or fear, or maybe both. That's what HOA control did. Made good people silent. I walked out into the dusk with heat in my chest and purpose in my stride. This wasn't about code compliance or shed ordinances. This was about control. Karen wanted me to feel small. She had no idea how far from small I was prepared to be. They saw what they wanted to see. A man with graying stubble and oil-stained hands bent over a toolbox. Someone who waved politely but didn't linger. A neighbor who kept to himself, mowed his lawn on schedule, and never raised his voice. To them, I was just another face in the neighborhood. A man whose life was measured in lawn clippings and paint touch-ups. They didn't know I spent the better part of 2 decades calculating wind drift over rooftops in Kandahar, or adjusting scope dials with frozen fingers in the foothills of the Hindu Kush. That I'd learned to read the silence between heartbeats, the breath before a trigger breaks. I served in shadows, not for medals, not for parades, for the men beside me, for the mission. I'd spent 20 years lying in wait, invisible in ghillie suits, eyes locked on high-value targets while the rest of the world spun obliviously. They didn't know the hours I spent training rookies in sniper school, grizzled cops and hotshot recruits alike, teaching them not just how to shoot, but when not to. Judging wind, distance, terrain, temperament, judging people. You learn a lot when you're teaching someone to kill from 1,000 yards away. You learn that patience is a weapon, that calm is control, that the loudest man in the room is usually the least dangerous. They didn't know that I kept my skills sharp out of principle, not paranoia, that the tools in my shed weren't for show, that every bolt, every reticle, every lock was placed with intention. Precision wasn't just a habit. It was who I was. So when Karen Hastings and her HOA lapdogs strutted through my gate like a firing squad in pressed polos, they didn't see a threat. They saw a man too broken by years of quiet to bite back. They didn't see the ranger tab tucked in a drawer, or the letter of commendation from the governor's office, or the certificate naming me master instructor by the State Law Enforcement Commission. They didn't see that I'd walked through real war and returned not weaker but tempered. They didn't see the fire they'd just kicked awake. They thought I was just some guy in a shed. They had no idea I'd spent my life preparing for ambushes just like this one. I hadn't worn a ghillie suit in years, but the mindset never left me. Recon wasn't just a tactic, it was muscle memory. You observe, you document, you verify, and when the time comes, you strike with precision so clean it looks like fate. I pulled out my old military-grade laptop, still patched with a decal from the 75th Ranger Regiment. The same system I used to track targets through drone footage was now repurposed to expose a fraud on domestic soil, my soil. I started simple, reverse image searches of the uniforms. The patches led me to a uniform distributor based in Henderson, Nevada. Tactical tech supplies, legal for civilians to buy, no background checks, no oversight, just a catalog full of professional enforcement gear for anyone with a credit card and a grudge. I ordered the same patch they wore. Arrived in a padded envelope 3 days later. Cost me $11. That's what my rights had been violated for. $11 cosplay. Then I moved on to their identities. I ran facial recognition on the clearest frame from my trail cam, the one that caught the lead guy adjusting his ball cap by my back gate. Found a match in an old police forum thread. Doug Colvin. A failed mall cop with a penchant for power trips, arrested twice for impersonating an officer, sued for assaulting a tenant while working security at a condo complex in Arizona. His license had been revoked, twice. The more I found, the darker it got. The second man, Greg Weller, was listed in a class action lawsuit against a disbanded HOA firm in Colorado for unlawful entry and property damage. The third didn't show up in any databases, which made me even more curious. Ghosts don't exist in public records unless someone wants them to. I went back through my trail cam footage, not just the day they barged in, but the nights before. They had scoped the property. One had climbed the curb at 2:13 a.m., walked halfway down my driveway, and looked straight into the lens. Gloves. Hoodie. No HOA insignia then, just intent. I built a folder, digital and printed, labeled every timestamp, highlighted inconsistencies in their report versus the footage. I gathered neighbor testimony. Several had seen the men enter without knocking. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. They'd kicked down a door they thought was unguarded. Now I was building a case. And every piece of evidence clicked into place like the parts of a scope zeroing in. The first place I sent the footage was the sheriff's office. I didn't call. I didn't ask for permission. I packaged the clips, documents, vendor receipts, Colvin's criminal record, and the annotated screenshots from my trail cam into a drive labeled Unauthorized Entry, Possible criminal impersonation. I hand-delivered it, when the deputy behind the glass window skimmed it and asked, "This from a break-in?" I said, "Worse, it was sanctioned." He raised an eyebrow but took the drive. Next, I hit the press. Red Mesa's local news might have been small, but they liked stories with teeth. I emailed every outlet from our Dusty Town's morning paper to the regional affiliate in Amarillo. I didn't frame it as a dispute. I framed it as what it was, a criminal conspiracy masquerading as neighborhood management. My subject line read, "HOA deploys unlicensed armed imposters. Homeowner has proof." Then I went grassroots. Real grassroots. I made 200 black and white flyers with a grainy still of Colvin stepping into my shed with gloves on, timestamp burned into the corner. Across the top, "Do you know who's really entering your property?" Beneath it, "Your neighbor was violated. You could be next." I walked door to door, slipped them under windshields, taped them to HOA notice boards, right next to Karen Hastings' weekly updates about weed height regulations and approved fence stains. And then I did something no HOA rulebook could shut down. I threw a barbecue. I dragged my smoker out front, loaded it with ribs and mesquite, cracked open a cooler of sodas, and set a projector screen against the garage wall. No speeches, no drama, just food, fire, and facts. I looped the trail cam footage on a muted reel, over and over, silent, damning evidence. Neighbors trickled in slowly, some out of curiosity, others out of the weight of their own silence. Janine from 2 houses down brought baked beans. She told me they fined her $200 last month because her son left a basketball in the front yard. Old Mr. Whitaker leaned on his cane and muttered, "They said I couldn't fly the American flag on Sundays. Told me it was visual clutter." Then came the bombshells. Rita Morgan, who'd lived here 20 years, said they opened her mailbox once to check for non-standard flyers, a violation of federal law. And that's when the mood changed. It wasn't just my war anymore. It was ours. They came back loud. No knocking this time. Just boots on gravel and a voice bellowing over the chain-link gate like a sheriff in a spaghetti western. Only this wasn't the movies. And these men weren't lawmen. Doug Colvin strutted up the driveway, flanked by the same 2 cronies from the first visit, his polyester badge stitched tighter, his chest puffed bigger, but his eyes scanning the houses. He knew people were watching. That was the point. This wasn't enforcement. It was theater, intimidation by volume. "You violated multiple HOA ordinances," he shouted, his voice straining to sound official. "You are subject to immediate compliance checks and possible seizure of materials deemed unsafe." Behind him, Greg Weller started filming on his phone, a pitiful attempt at optics, like capturing an uncooperative homeowner would save him when the truth broke wide open. Neighbors peeked from windows. Some stepped onto their lawns, arms crossed, brows furrowed. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. "Doug," I said, voice low, steady, and loud enough to carry, "you're in violation of Penal Code 538D, impersonating a peace officer, and you were told, legally, to stay off my property." He smirked. "This ain't your courtroom, tough guy." I nodded once, calm as a sniper at half breath. "No," I said. "It's better." The side gate swung open behind me. 2 figures stepped forward, crisp khakis, polished boots, real badges catching the sun like justice itself. Deputy Morales and Deputy Grant. Sheriff's Department. They'd been waiting, just behind the fence, arms folded. Now they approached, calm but direct, like men who'd seen too many idiots in discount uniforms. "Mr. Colvin," Morales said, removing a folded document from his breast pocket, "you are in direct violation of a court-issued cease and desist order. You are under arrest." Colvin started to object, but Weller was already backing away, hands up like a kid caught stealing cookies. Grant moved fast. The cuffs clicked before Doug could spit another lie. No shouting, no struggle. Just the deflation of a bully who'd finally been cornered by someone he couldn't intimidate. The street was dead silent except for the zip of the cuffs and the crunch of boots as they were led away. The neighbors didn't cheer. They didn't need to. Justice wasn't loud. It was final. When the news broke, it hit like a thunderclap in a desert town. The footage of Colvin and his men in handcuffs was everywhere, plastered across the Red Mesa Gazette's front page, featured on the evening segment of Channel 8, even clipped into trending forums where people with no connection to our little neighborhood were suddenly experts on HOA tyranny. The headline was brutal and direct. Fake cops? Real crimes? HOA security arrested in Red Mesa. Karen Hastings tried to pivot. Fast. She called an emergency meeting, closed to residents, of course, and issued a statement within 24 hours. I placed my trust in a third-party firm recommended by a previous board. I was misled, she claimed. I take full responsibility but was not aware of the methods used. But the truth had already bled through the seams. I'd saved every scrap, every email, every voicemail, and most damning of all, a covertly recorded HOA meeting from 2 months prior, when Karen sat at the head of the conference table and casually approved the hiring of a firm willing to apply pressure when necessary. Her exact words. She smiled when she said it. I shared the audio, with the sheriff, with the press, with the residents. The backlash wasn't instant. It was volcanic. People who'd once whispered about garden hose fines and flag code violations now came forward with receipts and fury. Karen hadn't just failed in oversight, she'd authored the playbook. Her signature was on the security contract. Not a recommendation, not a referral, a direct hire. She'd bypassed the standard vote. She'd even refused to publish the meeting minutes that recorded it, claiming data loss. The final blow came during the next HOA assembly, this time packed wall to wall. No donuts, no pleasantries, just silence as she walked in. Her usual veneer was cracked, makeup heavier than usual, smile forced into place. She tried to open the meeting with the same robotic grace, but no one responded. Then the vote was called. Unanimous. Not a single hand spared her, not one. Karen didn't argue. She just gathered her papers, stood, and left. No applause, no jeers, just the sound of her heels tapping the tile as her illusion of power dissolved behind her. The rain was over. The board and the neighborhood would never be the same again. They offered me a seat at the table, the one Karen used to occupy like a throne, but I didn't take it. I wasn't interested in titles or gavel taps. I wasn't interested in running anything. What I wanted was simpler. No more strangers in tactical polos knocking on doors like they owned the place. No more threats masquerading as memos. No more neighbors living like suspects in their own homes. I didn't want power. I wanted peace. But peace had to be built. So I got to work. The new board was different. It wasn't made up of ladder climbers or petty tyrants. It was made up of people who'd been fined for Christmas lights, cited for having excessive mulch, or told their kids' lemonade stand was a non-permitted commercial venture. People like me. Tired people, smart people, people who finally understood what unchecked authority could become. We started with the charter. It read like a document written in a bunker. Vague clauses, discretionary enforcement, loopholes wide enough to drive a riding mower through. Every line that gave the board unchecked power was stripped bare. Discretionary inspections became resident-approved site visits. Fines couldn't be levied without a public vote. Enforcement officers abolished completely. No more contracts with third-party compliance teams. If there was an issue, it had to be handled in the light, never in the shadows. We added a clause that all HOA meeting minutes had to be published within 48 hours, unedited, and accessible to every homeowner online. We instituted quarterly town halls, not mandatory, not performative, just open forums where anyone could speak, no gatekeeping. For the first time, people didn't just show up. They stayed. They asked questions. They brought ideas. And slowly, a strange thing started to happen. The community felt like a community again. Kids rode bikes without their parents checking for clipboard patrols. Flags went back up. Yards got messy. People laughed about it, not fined for it. We kept the basics: shared landscaping, the pool fund, emergency snow removal. But the fear was gone. The invisible pressure that had wrapped around us like a noose had been cut. What the old board had called order was just control. What we built in its place was something better, not perfect, not always smooth, but honest. The fake power they wielded? It turned to dust the moment we stopped being afraid to question it. And from those ashes, something real finally grew. They offered me a seat at the table, the one Karen used to occupy like a throne, but I didn't take it. I wasn't interested in titles or gavel taps. I wasn't interested in running anything. What I wanted was simpler. No more strangers in tactical polos knocking on doors like they owned the place. No more threats masquerading as memos. No more neighbors living like suspects in their own homes. I didn't want power. I wanted peace. But peace had to be built. So I got to work. The new board was different. It wasn't made up of ladder climbers or petty tyrants. It was made up of people who'd been fined for Christmas lights, cited for having excessive mulch, or told their kids' lemonade stand was a non-permitted commercial venture. People like me. Tired people. Smart people. People who finally understood what unchecked authority could become. We started with the charter. It read like a document written in a bunker. Vague clauses, discretionary enforcement, loopholes wide enough to drive a riding mower through. Every line that gave the board unchecked power was stripped bare. Discretionary inspections became resident-approved site visits. Fines couldn't be levied without a public vote. Enforcement officers? Abolished completely. No more contracts with third-party compliance teams. If there was an issue, it had to be handled in the light, never in the shadows. We added a clause that all HOA meeting minutes had to be published within 48 hours, unedited, and accessible to every homeowner online. We instituted quarterly town halls, not mandatory, not performative, just open forums where anyone could speak, no gatekeeping. For the first time, people didn't just show up. They stayed. They asked questions. They brought ideas. And slowly, a strange thing started to happen. The community felt like a community again. Kids rode bikes without their parents checking for clipboard patrols. Flags went back up. Yards got messy. People laughed about it, not fined for it. We kept the basics: shared landscaping, the pool fund, emergency snow removal. But the fear was gone. The invisible pressure that had wrapped around us like a noose had been cut. What the old board had called order was just control. What we built in its place was something better. Not perfect, not always smooth, but honest. The fake power they wielded? It turned to dust the moment we stopped being afraid to question it. And from those ashes, something real finally grew. The sun still hits Red Mesa the same way it always has. Slow and golden in the morning, brutal by noon, soft and forgiving at dusk. The cicadas still scream in the oaks during summer, and the wind still carries the scent of mesquite and sun-scorched cedar. On the surface, nothing's changed. But walk down Maplewood Drive now, and you'll feel it. The absence of fear. The quiet pride in a street no longer under siege. I still live in the same house. The same creaky floorboards, the same dented mailbox, the same shed that started it all. I patched the siding, replaced the hinges, and added a new lock just for good measure. Not because I expect trouble, but because I remember it. I still teach marksmanship on weekends, same as before. Still drill trigger discipline, wind call, target acquisition. I tell my students that calm is a weapon, and clarity is stronger than muscle. Most of them think I'm talking about shooting. Some of them get it later. The neighbors wave now. They ask about scopes and ballistics, sure, but they also ask about bylaws and budgets, how to keep a system fair without letting it rot. They ask how I stayed so calm, how I knew what to do. The truth is, I didn't. I just refused to let fear write the rules. I never fought the HOA because I hated the idea of community standards. I fought because no organization, no board, no stitched-on badge has the right to strip a person's dignity under the mask of order. You don't enter someone's life with a clipboard and threats and call it compliance. You don't kick in a shed door and call it neighborhood improvement. You ask, you listen, you earn respect. They thought I was just some guy with a wrench, a man who would grumble and fold like the rest. They saw cracked knuckles and assumed weakness. What they missed was the discipline behind the silence, the patience honed by decades behind a scope, the steel in the spine that doesn't rattle just because someone raised their voice. I didn't win because I was loud. I won because I waited. And when the time came, I hit the target so clean, they never saw it coming. Let them remember, you can fine a man into silence, but you cannot intimidate someone trained to breathe through chaos.